Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best AD carries for patch 5.18. So first up, I have Sivir. I still think that even though Sivir has been receiving some decent nerfs lately, she's still a pretty strong pick for solo queue. I think that her ultimate is still one of the best abilities in the game for solo queue because it can change the game just in an instant. If you find that pick with Sivir's ultimate and you chase down a high priority target, if you get that kill, then you can just transition that into a Baron or a Dragon or towers, and I just really like the versatility that you do get out of Sivir's ultimate. She's also a pretty strong laner. She doesn't really have any hard counters in the laning phase. She can do well in pretty much any matchup, and she's also a pretty good pick into strong CC supports because of her spell shield. She's got the best wave clear in the game in my opinion because of her W and her Q as well, and her auto attack reset on her W allows her to trade really nicely in the laning phase. Her poke is pretty good as well with her Q. She does have a pretty nice passive as well. It allows her to kind of make up for her shorter auto attack range because she does get that little burst of movement speed whenever she does auto attack with her passive. And a few cons to Sivir is that she is shorter range, so you do have to be careful about your positioning in team fights, especially when your E and your ultimate are on cooldown. So next up, I have Ashe. I think that Ashe is actually pretty strong in this meta right now because she's a great pick against the Juggernaut tanks. The Juggernauts obviously don't have very strong mobility, and Ashe is a great pick into them because it just allows her to line up really easy arrows, and it allows her to kite them really easily because, for example, if Darius misses his hook on Ashe, then Ashe can just kite out the Darius forever because of Ashe's passive and because of all the slow she's got. So I do think that Ashe, as long as you can position well and as long as you know how to kite, she is a very good pick in this meta still. And her ultimate is really strong as well. It's kind of like Sivir's ultimate in the sense that if you can just find that good ultimate, then it could transition into a Dragon, into a Baron, and into towers. And come late game, if you can land that ult on the enemy mid laner or AD carry, it could just win you the game right there. And she is also a pretty good pick against tanks because when she does get those 5 stacks on her Q, then she gets just a lot of damage coming out of that, and it just allows her to shred down the tankier targets really nicely. She does also have a lot of CC, like I said, with her passive, her W, and her ultimate. And the vision with her E, in my opinion, is a little bit of an underrated part of her kit because she can spot the jungler out really nicely with that ability, and you can just help your team out when playing as Ashe. Whenever you're not sure where the jungler is, just shoot that into the enemy's jungle, and then even if you don't reveal where the enemy jungler is, you'll know where they aren't. So then you can suspect that, for example, if you shoot Ashe's ultimate to the red buff and you don't see the enemy jungler there, and you can see that he's cleared the Wraith camp as well because the radius on the E is pretty big, you'll know that the jungler is probably on the top side, so then you can relay that information over to your team. You can tell your top laner that the jungler is probably on top side, so then they can play a little bit more passive, and it's just an overall really strong part of her kit in my opinion. She is also one of the longer ranged AD carries in the game, so she does do pretty well against the shorter ranged AD carries like Sivir and Vayne. And one con to Ashe is that she does not have a gap closer, so you do have to be careful about your positioning in team fights. Next up, I have Jinx. I think that Jinx is probably one of the strongest late game AD carries in the game because of the AoE crits coming out of her fish bones. If she can get a few of those off in a team fight, then she can just win the team fight for her team. And as long as you can position well in team fights as Jinx, I do think that she is one of the most rewarding AD carries in the game. She scales very well into the late game, and she's also got pretty good crowd control for an AD carry. Her W and her E both provide some sort of CC, and her ultimate is also really nice for just finishing off that low health target or for just getting a little bit of damage off before a team fight starts. And she is also a very good tower pusher, one of the best in the game besides Tristana for sure. And she's also got really good cleanup potential in team fights due to her passive. Her long range with her fish bones allows her to stay pretty safe in team fights as well, and allows her to poke down the lower range AD carries in the laning phase too. A few cons to Jinx is that she does not have a gap closer, so like Ashe, you do have to be careful that you're not getting out of position during a team fight, and she is also semi skill shot reliant with her W and with her ultimate. So next I have Vayne. I think that Vayne is one of the strongest AD carries in this meta right now because she's one of the best kiting AD carries in the game, and with these juggernauts being played, Vayne in my opinion is one of the biggest counters to them because she can just kite them out really hard with her condemn and with her tumble. So I think that if you're looking for a strong counter to the likes of Darius and Garen and Fiora in the top lane, I would definitely recommend picking Vayne. She is already one of the most picked AD carries in the game right now, so you probably already have been picking her into those champions, and she does also have pretty good kill pressure once she does hit level 6, especially if she is playing with a strong all-in support like a Leona or a Braum, and she's one of the strongest late game AD carries in the game besides Jinx as well. Her true damage that she gets with her W late game can just absolutely melt, and it just makes her a great pick if the enemy team does have a tankier comp as well. She does have the gap closer on her Q, which is pretty nice for just staying safe in team fights and also for in the laning phase. And she is also one of the strongest 1v1 AD carries in the game. If you can land that condemn during a 1v1, then you pretty much won that duel right there, because the amount of time that they are stunned for and the true damage that you're going to get with Vayne is really good. The stealth with her ultimate is also, I think, one of the most underrated parts of her kit. It's definitely really strong for team fighting, especially when your Q is on like a 2 or 3 second cooldown. Every time you use your Q, you're going to be stealthing, so it just makes her really hard to focus down in a team fight, especially if she does get to that late game. And a few cons to Vayne is that she is shorter range, so she does have a little bit of a weaker laning phase against some of the longer ranged AD carries like Ashe and Jinx, and she is a little bit harder to play as well in my opinion. So to round out the top 5 for this patch is going to be Mordekaiser. Right now, Mordekaiser is sitting at the highest win rate for any AD carry in the game, and it's for pretty good reason. If you pair Mordekaiser up with an all-in support like a Leona or someone like a Nautilus, any support that's aggressive in the laning phase, then you could take advantage of Mord's really strong laning phase and just end up snowballing the game, because the damage that you do get with Mord, as long as you are paired with a aggressive support, is really good. He also does have a very strong late game. You can pretty much one-shot the enemy AD carry with your Q come late game, and his dragon pet is also really good. If you do get that advantage in the laning phase, then you can just look to take dragon and just push down either the mid lane tower or the bot lane tower with your dragon pet. The solo XP in the dual lane is just really strong too, and this is one of the main reasons why Mordekaiser is so strong in the bot lane. He hits level 6 when the enemies are still level 4 or level 5, so he can just zone the enemies out once he does get that level 6 to the point where they won't even be able to CS. And if you are playing with an aggressive support, that's why I would recommend doing that, because once you do get that level 6 as Mordekaiser, since the enemies are going to be level 4 or level 5, then you can just all in them really nicely. And he also does get pretty tanky come late game. He doesn't have to build full damage, which most of the other AD carries do. He can get 1 or 2 defensive items if he needs to. And he also does scale with AD and AP as well, which makes his item builds really unique. And a few cons to Mordekaiser is that he does not have a gap closer, so you do have to be careful. He's also not ranged, obviously, so he can get kited pretty easily due to him not having a gap closer, and also due to him not being ranged if he does not get that lead in the early game. And he is also pretty weak in my opinion if he's playing with a passive support. I would just never recommend to pair a Mordekaiser with someone like a Janna or a Nami, or someone that's not going to be aggressive in the laning phase, because you do want to take advantage of Mordekaiser's really strong level 6 all in, and just the advantage that you do get with Mordekaiser while having that solo XP. First up on the honorable mentions, I have Tristana. So Tristana is a pretty safe AD carry. You can never really go wrong with picking Tristana because she's got great mobility with her W, and her ultimate provides really nice self peel as well. She does have a little bit of a mid-game power trough, which is why she's not on my top 5. The other AD carries on my top 5, like Vayne and Jinx and Ashe, have a pretty strong mid game, whereas Tristana, if she doesn't get a lead in the early game, she does fall off a little bit, and then she picks up come late game again. So I think that as long as you can get to that late game as Tristana, then she can be a very rewarding AD carry. So next up on the honorable mentions, I have Draven. Draven is definitely more of the harder AD carries to play in the game, in my opinion. His axes definitely are a little bit hard to catch in team fights if you're focused on like just positioning, and then you have to be focused on catching your axes as well. So I do think if you know how to play a good Draven, you can carry pretty hard. And once he does stack cash in on his adoration stacks, then he can just end up snowballing the game. But if he does fall behind, then it definitely does take him a long time to catch up. And he is one of the weaker AD carries in the game if you can't get a lead with him. Next I have Kalista. Kalista, even though she has been receiving some decent nerfs lately, I still think she's a really good AD carry if you know how to play her correctly and you can use her passive to its fullest potential. Her early game is still really strong, and if you pair her up with a good aggressive support in the early game, then you can just look to snowball that early game and pick up a few kills there. So I do think that as long as you know how to play her and you can use her passive, she is still a pretty good pick. And lastly, on the honorable mentions, I have Corki. So Corki's got one of the strongest mid-game power spikes in the game, and that's why I think he's just a really good pick for solo queue, because if you can get that lead in the laning phase and then just transition that over to the mid-game power spike that Corki gets with his Trinity Force, then he can just end up ending games before the 30-minute point as long as he does group with his team. Once he does get that Trinity Force, you can pretty much duel any other AD carry in the game once you pick up Trinity Force on Corki, even if the enemy has if the enemy has an Infinity Edge and they have, say, like a Phantom Dancer, if you just have Trinity Force, you're probably going to be able to outduel them even though they have another item on you. So that's why I think that Corki is just a really strong pick, because if you can get to that mid game as him and you can just group with your team, then you can just take over the game. So that is all for the video, guys. If you enjoyed, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you in my next video.